Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Luke Harrison, and at 6:47 a.m. my radio crackled with the call that would change my life forever, and my understanding of reality itself. Unit 23, we have a code yellow. Missing person, Kevin Park, age 19, last seen yesterday evening at Whisper Ridge Campground, Olympic National Park. Families requesting immediate search and rescue. Your sector is grid 7 Alpha through 9 Charlie. Acknowledge. I fumbled with my radio, hands still shaking from the morning coffee and nervous energy. 3 weeks into my ranger career, and this was my first real missing person case. Copy that, dispatch. Unit 23 en route to Grid 7 Alpha. ETA 15 minutes. The October morning air bit through my regulation jacket as I loaded my pack with the precision they'd drilled into us at the academy. GPS unit, check. First aid kit, check. Emergency beacon, check. Water for 12 hours, check. My stomach churned with a mixture of excitement and terror. This was it. This was why I'd left my accounting job in Seattle. This was my chance to prove I belonged out here. Kevin Park, 19 years old. The name echoed in my head as I drove the ranger truck down the winding Forest Service road toward Whisper Ridge. According to the initial report crackling through my radio, Kevin had been camping alone against park recommendations and failed to check in with his parents as planned. His Toyota Corolla was still parked at the trailhead, tent still set up, but Kevin had vanished. The scent of Douglas fir and western hemlock filled my nostrils as I parked at coordinates 47.8021 degree N, 123.60444 degree W. The familiar smell usually calmed me, but something felt wrong. The morning bird song seemed muted, distant. Even the ever-present sound of the Kino River felt subdued, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I shouldered my 40-pound pack and started toward Kevin's campsite. My boots, brand new Danners that still gave me blisters, crunched through the carpet of pine needles and fallen leaves. The GPS beeped steadily, guiding me through terrain I was still learning. Each step deeper into the forest, the wrongness grew stronger. Kevin's tent was exactly as described, a small two-person REI dome tent, bright orange against the muted greens and browns of the forest floor. His campfire had burned down to cold ashes. A half-eaten can of beans sat on the picnic table, spoon still sticking out. His sleeping bag was unzipped and thrown aside as if he'd left in a hurry. But it was the tracks that made my rookie training kick in, or rather the lack of tracks. I knelt beside the tent, studying the soft earth. Kevin's boot prints were clear enough, size 10 Merrell hiking boots, based on the tread pattern. But the prints simply ended. 20 feet from his tent, heading toward the tree line, the tracks just stopped. Not like he'd stepped onto hard ground or rocks. They literally ended, as if Kevin Park had simply ceased to exist mid-stride. My radio crackled. Unit 23, what's your status? Luke here, at the campsite now. Found the subject's camp intact, but I hesitated. How do you explain impossible tracks to your supervisor when you're still the rookie? The trail goes cold pretty quick. Requesting permission to expand search to Grid 8 Alpha. Copy that. You have authorization for expanded search. Check in every 30 minutes. I clipped the radio back to my belt and stared at where Kevin's tracks ended. My training said to establish a baseline, search in expanding circles, look for broken branches or disturbed vegetation. But my gut, that instinct that had been growing stronger since I'd started working in these mountains, said something entirely different. My gut said run. Instead, I followed protocol. I pulled out my compass and began a systematic search pattern, marking my GPS coordinates every 100 yards. The forest around Kevin's campsite was eerily undisturbed. No broken branches, no scuff marks on tree bark, no pieces of torn clothing. It was as if Kevin had simply evaporated. That's when I found the doll, It was sitting against the base of a massive Douglas fir, maybe 30 yards from where Kevin's tracks ended. At first glance, it looked like something a child might have dropped. A porcelain doll about 18 inches tall, wearing a faded blue dress with tiny white buttons. Its painted face was turned away from me, brown curls spilling over its shoulders. Every instinct I had screamed at me not to approach it. But I was a ranger, and this was evidence. I pulled on latex gloves and knelt down beside the doll. The moment I touched it, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. My breath misted in the suddenly frigid air as I turned the doll to face me. Its painted eyes, once probably blue, had faded to an unsettling gray that seemed to shift and swirl like storm clouds. Its rosebud mouth was cracked, giving it a twisted expression that could have been a smile or a grimace. But it was the smell that nearly made me vomit. Beneath the pine scent and forest loam was something else. Something rotten and ancient, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. Like death, but older. Much older. I should have called it in immediately. Should have marked the location and waited for backup. Should have followed every protocol they drilled into my head during training. Instead, I picked up the doll. The moment my fingers closed around its porcelain torso, images flooded my mind. Not memories. Something else. Something that felt like watching a movie projected directly onto my brain. I saw Kevin Park walking through these same woods, but the trees were different. Older. The paths were subtly wrong, leading in directions that shouldn't exist. I saw him following something. A child's laughter echoing through the trees, getting always farther away. I saw him stumble into a clearing that wasn't on any map, where the geometry of space itself seemed bent and wrong. And I saw the doll, sitting in the center of that impossible clearing, waiting. Unit 23. Status report. My radio jolted me back to reality. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the doll. Luke here, I found something. A doll. It might be connected to the missing person. A doll? Luke, are you feeling all right? You sound shaky. I realized I was hyperventilating. The professional part of my brain knew I was having a panic attack, but the rest of me was drowning in the certainty that I was holding something that shouldn't exist. Something that had been waiting in these woods for far longer than any doll should last. I'm fine. This is my first missing person case. Still learning. Copy that. Bring any evidence back to the station for processing. But priority one is finding Kevin Park. I should have headed back immediately. Should have gotten the doll to someone who could explain why it filled me with such overwhelming dread. Instead, I found myself walking deeper into the forest, following a path that hadn't been there when I'd arrived. The trees around me grew taller and stranger with each step. The Douglas firs gave way to species I couldn't identify. Trees with bark that seemed to shimmer in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The very air grew thicker, pressing against my lungs like liquid. And through it all, the doll seemed to grow heavier in my hands. Not physically heavier, but heavier in a way that defied explanation. Like it was accumulating gravity, or importance, or something else entirely. That's when I heard the laughter. It was high and sweet, the sound of a child playing, but it echoed strangely in the dense forest, seeming to come from every direction at once. And underneath the innocent joy, there was something else. Something that made my skin crawl and my primitive brain scream warnings I couldn't understand. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Luke Harrison's situation? Comment below. I followed the sound, even though every rational part of my mind was begging me to turn around. The path beneath my feet was soft with decades of fallen needles, but my footsteps made no sound. Even my breathing seemed muffled, as if the forest was absorbing all noise except for that terrible, beautiful laughter. The trees opened into a clearing that definitely hadn't been on my topographical maps. It was perfectly circular, maybe 50 feet across, ringed by trees so tall their tops disappeared into a sky that seemed darker than it should be at 9:30 a.m. In the center of the clearing was a ring of stones, not natural river rocks, but carved granite blocks covered in symbols that hurt to look at. and standing in the center of that stone ring was Kevin Park. He was facing away from me, perfectly still. His hiking clothes were intact, his backpack still strapped to his shoulders. But something was wrong with the way he stood. Too rigid, like a mannequin posed by someone who had never seen a human being before. "Kevin," I called out. My voice sounded small and distant in the strange clearing. "Kevin Park?" He turned to face me, and I saw what had happened to his eyes. They were gone. Not gouged out or injured, simply absent, as if they had never existed. In their place were smooth expanses of skin, giving his face a horrible blank expression. But somehow, impossibly, I could tell he was looking at me. His mouth opened, and the child's laughter poured out. Not his voice, the same high, sweet sound I'd been following. It was coming from Kevin's throat, but it wasn't Kevin laughing. That's when I understood. The doll in my hands wasn't just a child's toy. It was something far older and more terrible than my rookie mind could have imagined. It was a collector, a fisher of souls, using the innocent appearance of a discarded plaything to lure victims into spaces that shouldn't exist. And Kevin Park was its newest prize. The laughter stopped abruptly, and Kevin's eyeless face tilted with predatory curiosity. When he spoke, his voice was layered with harmonics that no human throat should produce. "Another ranger," he said, and the words seemed to come from everywhere at once. The last one lasted almost a week before we wore him out completely. How long will you last, I wonder? My hands moved without conscious thought, hurling the doll as hard as I could toward the edge of the clearing. The moment it left my fingers, reality snapped back like a rubber band. The carved stones vanished. The impossible trees flickered and became normal Douglas firs. The too dark sky brightened to proper morning light, and Kevin Park collapsed like a marionette with cut strings. I ran to him, my EMT training finally kicking in. He was unconscious but breathing, his pulse rapid but strong. Most importantly, his eyes were back, normal brown eyes, blinking, confused and terrified. "What? Where am I?" he whispered. "I was following. There was a little girl crying for help." I keyed my radio with shaking hands. "Unit 23 to dispatch." I found him. Kevin Park is alive and conscious, requesting immediate medical evacuation to coordinates. I looked at my GPS and felt my blood turn to ice. The display showed coordinates that were impossible. According to my GPS, we were standing in the middle of the Quinault River, 30 feet underwater. I looked back at where I'd thrown the doll. It was gone, of course. But carved into the bark of the nearest tree were symbols, the same impossible geometry I'd seen on the stone ring that no longer existed. They seemed to shift and writhe when I wasn't looking directly at them. By the time the medevac helicopter arrived, I had convinced myself it was altitude sickness, rookie nerves, the stress of my first real emergency. Kevin Park was dehydrated and confused, but physically unharmed. The official report would list his disappearance as disorientation due to hypothermia, a plausible explanation for why he'd wandered off the main trail. But that night, alone in my ranger station cabin, I researched the history of Olympic National Park. I found references dating back to the 1800s, indigenous warnings about certain areas of the forest where reality grew thin, stories of trappers and loggers who vanished without a trace, only to be found days later with no memory of where they'd been. And in a 1952 newspaper clipping from the Port Angeles Daily News, I found a photograph that stopped my heart. A search and rescue team posed beside their equipment, celebrating the successful recovery of a lost child. And there, sitting innocuously on a log behind them, was the doll. The same doll, identical down to the faded blue dress and the brown curls. 70 years ago. I've been a ranger for 8 months now, and I've learned to read the signs. The way animal tracks stop abruptly for no reason. The clearings that appear on some days but not others. The reports of children's laughter echoing from sections of forest where no children should be. I've started carrying extra batteries for my GPS, and I've memorized the coordinates of every confirmed safe zone in my sector. I've learned which trails to avoid during certain moon phases, and which reports to take seriously, even when they sound impossible. Because I know now that there are things in these forests older than human civilization. Things that wear familiar faces to hide their alien hunger. Things that collect souls like a child collects toys and leave behind empty shells that walk and talk but no longer dream. Kevin Park recovered completely. He's back in college now, studying environmental science. He says he wants to become a park ranger someday to protect the wilderness he learned to love during his hiking accident. He doesn't remember the doll, doesn't remember the clearing that shouldn't exist, or the week he spent as a puppet dancing to inhuman music. His mind, in its mercy, has blocked out the memory of what happened to him in that space between spaces. But sometimes when I'm alone on patrol in the deepest parts of the forest, I hear laughter carried on the wind, high and sweet and innocent. And I know that somewhere in the darkness between the trees, an ancient thing wearing a child's face is waiting patiently for the next lost soul to wander into its web. The doll is still out there, still waiting, still collecting. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if Kevin Park was really the one who came back from that clearing, or if something else is wearing his face now, studying human behavior, learning to be more convincing for the next time it needs to lure someone into the spaces where reality grows thin. I've requested a transfer to a desert station in Arizona, somewhere with no trees to hide impossible clearings, no shadows deep enough to conceal things that shouldn't exist. My supervisor thinks it's because I can't handle the isolation of the forest, that I'm too much of a city boy to adapt to wilderness life. If only he knew the truth. If only he understood that the real horror isn't the isolation of the forest. It's discovering that you're never really alone out there. That ancient eyes are always watching from the spaces between spaces, and hungry things with innocent faces are always waiting. The worst part? I'm starting to hear the laughter even here in town. Even in my apartment with all the lights on and the TV turned up loud, which means either I'm losing my mind or it's learned my scent. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Kevin Park. I read every single one. My name is Tommy Brennan, and at 6:47 a.m. my radio crackled with the call that would change my life forever. Unit 23, we have a code yellow. Missing person, female, age 19, Sierra Martinez. Last seen yesterday evening, Cascade Trail, mile marker 7. Family just called it in. I was 3 sips into my morning coffee at Redwood National Park's ranger station, still rubbing sleep from my eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. The other rangers called me Wikipedia behind my back. Not exactly a compliment in a job where physical courage mattered more than knowing that Douglas firs can live over 1,000 years. Copy that, dispatch. Tommy Brennan responding. ETA 15 minutes. I grabbed my pack, checking the contents with practiced efficiency. Garmin GPS unit, emergency first aid kit, high-powered flashlight, emergency radio, protein bars, and my field notebook, where I documented everything with scientific precision. The other rangers made fun of my meticulous notes, but my documentation had solved 3 missing person cases in the past 2 years. The drive to Cascade Trail took me through morning fog that clung to the towering redwoods like ghostly fingers. My 2018 Ford Ranger's GPS showed coordinates 41.2132 Degern N, 124 Dow 46 Sectig W as I parked at the trailhead. The October air bit at my face, carrying the scent of wet pine needles and something else, something that made my analytical mind pause. Sierra Martinez, 19 years old, UC Berkeley student, missing since yesterday evening around 6 p.m. according to her frantic mother, who'd called me 3 times already. Please find my baby. Mrs. Martinez had sobbed into the phone an hour ago. She's all I have left. Her father died last year and she's my everything. She went hiking to clear her head about college stress and she always calls me by sunset. Always. Something's wrong. I began my search at mile marker 7, following protocol. Grid pattern, 30-foot spacing, marking GPS coordinates every 100 yards. The Cascade Trail wound through old-growth forest where trees older than America stretched into morning mist. My boots crunched on fallen leaves, each step recorded in my mental map. That's when I found the first piece of evidence. Sierra's UC Berkeley water bottle, half buried under a pile of leaves that looked deliberately arranged. The bottle was 20 feet off the main trail, near a cluster of ancient redwoods. I photographed it from multiple angles, logged GPS coordinates, then secured it in an evidence bag. Unit 23 to dispatch, I radioed. Found victim's water bottle at coordinates 41, 2089 degree N, 124.72 degree W. Appears to have been here overnight, continuing search pattern north. But something felt wrong. The morning forest was too quiet. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, none of the usual woodland sounds. Even the wind seemed to avoid this section of trail. My heart rate picked up and I found myself looking over my shoulder every few steps. That's when I saw it. Sitting at the base of a massive redwood, maybe 50 yards ahead, was what looked like a child's doll. I approached carefully, my scientific mind cataloging details. The doll was maybe 18 inches tall with a porcelain head and faded blue dress. Brown hair, cracked face, button eyes that seemed to track my movement. It looked old, maybe decades old, and completely out of place in the wilderness. "What the hell?" I muttered, kneeling down for a closer look. The doll's dress was stained with what looked like dirt and something darker. Its porcelain face had hairline cracks and one button eye hung loose. But the strangest thing was its position. Sitting upright against the tree, legs straight out, arms at its sides like someone had carefully placed it there. I photographed it from every angle, measuring its distance from Sierra's water bottle, 127 feet bearing 023 degrees. My training said to document everything, but my gut said to leave this thing alone. Instead, I carefully picked it up. The moment my fingers touched the porcelain, ice shot through my veins. Not cold air, actual ice, like touching a frozen corpse. I nearly dropped it, my breath coming out in visible puffs despite the October morning being relatively warm. "Jesus," I whispered, fumbling for my thermometer. 42 degrees. The doll was somehow 20 degrees colder than the ambient air temperature. I placed it in my pack, trying to ignore how wrong it felt. The weight was all wrong too. The thing felt heavy, like it was made of lead instead of porcelain and cloth. My radio crackled. "Unit 23, any updates?" "Still searching," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Found some evidence. Expanding search radius." I continued north, following what might have been a faint trail or might have been my imagination. The forest grew denser, older, more cathedral-like. Shafts of morning sunlight pierced the canopy in golden columns, but shadows seemed to move independently of the light. Every few minutes I checked my GPS. The coordinates made sense, but something felt off about the distances. According to my device, I'd walked 0.7 miles from the water bottle, but it felt like I'd been hiking for hours. That's when I heard it. A child's voice, singing a lullaby somewhere ahead. "Rockabye, baby," in the treetop. I froze, every nerve ending screaming danger. There shouldn't be any children out here. The voice was thin, distant, but carried clearly through the still air. "When the wind blows, the cradle will rock." I moved toward the sound, hand instinctively reaching for my radio. But something made me hesitate. What would I report? That I heard singing in the woods? Unit 23 was already the weird ranger who took too many notes and read field guides for fun. The singing stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard my own heartbeat, fast and irregular. My mouth was dry, tasting metallic with adrenaline. The pack on my back felt heavier, and I realized I could feel the doll's weight shifting as I moved, like it was moving. I spun around, dropping my pack and yanking it open. The doll sat exactly as I'd placed it, button eyes staring up at me with what looked like amusement. "Get it together, Tommy," I muttered, but my voice cracked. I took out my field notebook and wrote, 10:23 a.m., auditory hallucination, child's voice singing. Investigate psychological effects of isolation and stress on search and rescue personnel. Writing it down helped. Everything had a logical explanation. Stress, lack of sleep, The pressure of finding Sierra alive. The human brain was notorious for creating patterns and sounds that weren't there. I shouldered my pack and continued north. The trail, if it was still a trail, led into a grove of redwoods so massive they dwarfed everything around them. Some were easily 20 feet in diameter, their tops lost in fog. The ground was carpeted with ferns and fallen logs, creating a maze of green corridors. My GPS showed I was now 1.2 miles from Sierra's water bottle, deeper into the forest than most day hikers ever went. This was old growth, the kind of place that had stood unchanged for centuries. That's when I found Sierra's jacket. It was hanging from a branch about 8 feet off the ground, sleeves spread wide like someone was crucified in midair. The North Face logo was clearly visible, matching the description her mother had given me. I stared up at it, my analytical mind trying to process how it had gotten there. The branch was too high to reach without climbing, but there were no scuff marks on the bark, no disturbed vegetation below. It was as if the jacket had been placed there by someone very tall or... The doll shifted in my pack. I felt it move, a definite repositioning that had nothing to do with my walking. My skin crawled, but I forced myself to stay calm. Displacement due to walking rhythm. Simple physics. I used a fallen branch to knock Sierra's jacket down, then bagged it as evidence. Like the water bottle, it appeared to have been here overnight. But unlike the water bottle, it showed no signs of animal interference, no weather damage. It looked like it had been hung there deliberately, carefully. Unit 23 to dispatch, I radioed. Found victim's jacket. Continuing search. Victim may have gone significantly off trail. Copy, Unit 23. Do you need backup? I hesitated. Protocol said yes. I was now in deep wilderness, following increasingly strange evidence. But calling for backup meant admitting I couldn't handle this alone, and I could already imagine the other rangers' comments. Negative. Continuing solo. Beyond the grove, the forest changed. The trees were just as old, but something felt different. Wrong. The morning light seemed dimmer, though my watch showed only 11 a.m. The air smelled of decay and something else. Something sweet and cloying that made my stomach turn. I found Sierra's phone 30 yards later. It was sitting on a moss-covered log, screen up, completely undamaged. The phone was a newer iPhone, black case, fully charged according to the battery indicator. I photographed it in place, then picked it up with gloved hands. The last text message was to her mother, sent at 5:47 p.m. yesterday. Trail is beautiful. Taking some photos. Love you. But the photos in her gallery told a different story. The last 20 pictures were all of the same thing. The doll. Sierra had photographed it from every angle, close-ups of its cracked face, its button eyes, its stained dress. The timestamps showed she'd taken them over the course of an hour, between 5:15 and 6:15 p.m. In the final photo, the doll was sitting exactly where I'd found it this morning. My hand shook as I scrolled through the images. Sierra had found the doll first, been fascinated by it, photographed it extensively. Then she'd disappeared, leaving her jacket hanging impossibly high and her phone sitting pristine on a log. The doll in my pack grew heavier. I forced myself to think logically. Sierra had found the doll, been intrigued by it, maybe tried to retrieve it from wherever it had been placed. She'd gotten turned around in the dense forest, panicked, shed her jacket and phone while trying to find her way back to the trail. But that didn't explain how the jacket got 8 feet up a tree. If this story's giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Tommy's situation? Comment below. I checked my GPS again. I was now 8 miles from the original trail, in terrain that didn't appear on any map. According to my device, I was walking through solid mountainside, which was impossible. The path ahead led into a clearing I hadn't seen from any vantage point. Ancient redwoods formed a perfect circle around a space maybe 50 feet across. In the center sat the remains of what might have been a campfire, though the stones were covered with moss and looked decades old. But it was what surrounded the fire pit that made my blood freeze. Dolls. Dozens of them. They were arranged in concentric circles around the dead fire, all facing inward. Porcelain dolls, Rag dolls, plastic dolls, baby dolls. Some were missing limbs, others had cracked faces or missing eyes. All looked old, weathered, abandoned for years. And in the center, sitting in the ashes of the fire pit, was a doll that looked exactly like the one in my pack. I stumbled backward, my analytical mind completely short-circuiting. This wasn't possible. I was hallucinating, having some kind of breakdown, stress-induced psychosis. The isolation, the pressure, the strange discoveries. It was affecting my perception. But the dolls sat there undeniably real, staring at me with button eyes and painted faces. I pulled out my camera with shaking hands and started photographing everything. If I was losing my mind, at least I'd have evidence. The digital timestamps would prove what I'd seen when I'd seen it. That's when I noticed the doll in my pack had gone silent. Not silent. It had never made noise. But the weight was wrong again, lighter now, like it was empty. I dropped my pack and yanked it open. The doll was gone. I dumped everything out, checked every pocket, every compartment. Gone, like it had never been there. But there, sitting in the circle with all the others, was the doll I'd found. It sat in exactly the same position, upright, legs straight, arms at sides, staring at me with those button eyes. "This isn't happening," I whispered. The doll in the fire pit turned its head and looked directly at me. I ran. I crashed through the forest like a madman, branches tearing at my face, ferns whipping my legs. My GPS spun wildly, showing coordinates that made no sense. Elevation readings that jumped between sea level and 5,000 feet. Behind me, I could hear singing. "When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall." Not one voice. Dozens of voices, high and sweet and completely wrong. "And down will come baby, cradle and all." I burst out of the tree line onto what looked like the Cascade Trail, but wrong somehow. The path was too wide, too well-maintained, cutting through forest that looked subtly different from where I'd started. My radio crackled with static. 23. Respo, please. Unit 23 responding. I gasped into the radio. "I need backup, GPS coordinates." I looked at my device. It showed nothing but error messages. "Tom, you, see, party, en route." The signal faded to white noise. I stumbled down the trail, my mind racing. None of this made sense. The doll circle, the impossible distances, the GPS failures. But I had photos, evidence, proof that something was seriously wrong in these woods. That's when I saw Sierra. She was sitting on a fallen log maybe 100 yards ahead, back to me, perfectly still. Brown hair, blue shirt, exactly matching her description. "Sierra," I called, relief flooding through me. "Sierra Martinez." She didn't turn around. I approached carefully, my training kicking in. Possible head injury, shock, hypothermia. I could see her shoulders rising and falling with breath, so she was alive. "Sierra, my name is Tommy Brennan. I'm a park ranger. Your mother sent me to find you." I circled around to face her. It wasn't Sierra. It was the doll, sitting upright on the log, dressed in Sierra's clothes, wearing Sierra's face like a porcelain mask. Button eyes stared at me from features that were almost human, but completely wrong. The thing that wore Sierra's face smiled, revealing too many teeth. "She's safe," it said in Sierra's voice. "She's with the others now. They're all safe in the circle where they belong." I stumbled backward, my scientific worldview completely shattered. This wasn't stress or hallucination. This was something else, something that shouldn't exist, but undeniably did. "Where is she?" I managed to ask. The doll thing tilted its head with a sound like breaking porcelain. "She found us first, took our pictures, understood what we were. Now she's part of the collection." "What collection?" "The children who got lost. The hikers who wandered too far. The rangers who came looking." Its smile widened. "We've been collecting for so long, Tommy. And you brought one of us home." I realized what it meant. The doll I'd found, photographed, carried in my pack. I'd brought it to the circle. I'd completed some kind of ritual without knowing it. "The circle grows," the thing said. "Soon you'll join us too. Smart boys make the best dolls. They understand the rules." I turned and ran again, but the forest had changed. Every path led back to the clearing. Every trail circled around to the same grove of ancient redwoods. My GPS showed I was moving in impossible patterns, covering miles while going nowhere. The singing followed me everywhere. Hours passed. The sun never seemed to move, locked in perpetual morning light. My water ran out, then mysteriously refilled itself. My radio produced only static, then clear voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize. I found Sierra's real body in a hollow tree. She was sitting upright, eyes closed, perfectly preserved but empty somehow, like a doll, like a shell. When I touched her wrist, checking for a pulse I knew wouldn't be there, her skin felt like porcelain. "She's beautiful now," said a voice behind me. I turned to find the circle of dolls had followed me. They sat in perfect formation among the ferns, dozens of them, all staring with button eyes and painted faces. "You can't leave, Tommy," said the one wearing Sierra's face. "No one leaves the collection, but don't worry, it doesn't hurt. You just stop, and then you're safe forever." I backed against the hollow tree, my mind frantically trying to find a logical solution. There had to be a way out, some rule or pattern I could exploit. These things had rules. They'd waited for me to bring the doll to the circle. They needed some kind of completion. "What do you want?" I asked. "To play," they said in unison. "To never be alone. To keep the lost ones safe. And if I join you, then you'll understand. Then you'll help us find others." I thought about Sierra's mother waiting by the phone for news. I thought about the other rangers who would eventually come looking for me. I thought about the next hiker who would wander off the trail and find that first doll. "No," I said. The dolls tilted their heads in perfect synchronization. "You don't have a choice, Tommy. You're already changing." I looked down at my hands. My skin was pale, waxy, taking on a porcelain sheen. I could feel my thoughts slowing, my emotions dampening, like someone was turning down the volume on my humanity. But my analytical mind, the same mind that made me an outcast among the other rangers, found the pattern. The circle. They needed a complete circle. The fire pit in the center, the dolls arranged around it, the ritual of bringing the lost ones home. But circles could be broken. I charged toward the doll wearing Sierra's face. It didn't expect direct confrontation. These things were predators that relied on confusion, on lost and panicked victims. They didn't expect a nerd ranger to analyze their behavior and attack their weakness. I tackled the thing, and it felt like hitting a mannequin. Hard, artificial, wrong. But it was solid, physical, bound by some rules, even if they weren't natural laws. "The circle must be complete," it shrieked, its voice now a chorus of all the lost ones. "Then I'll incomplete it," I snarled, grabbing the thing by its porcelain face. The moment I touched it, I saw everything. Decades of missing persons, hikers and campers and rangers who'd vanished without a trace. All of them sitting in the circle, playing eternal games, never aging, never dying, never leaving. But I also saw the source, a child's doll, lost in the forest in 1952. A little girl's favorite toy, imbued with so much love and longing that it had refused to stay lost. It had called others to keep it company, creating its own twisted family. The original doll sat in the fire pit, ancient and powerful and completely insane with loneliness. I broke free from the Sierra thing and charged toward the center of the circle. The dolls moved to stop me, but they were slow, bound by the same rules that gave them power. I reached the fire pit as my skin completed its transformation to porcelain, my human thoughts fading to whispers. With the last of my human will, I picked up the original doll and threw it as hard as I could against the largest redwood. It shattered like a china plate. The circle exploded. I woke up on the Cascade Trail, mile marker 4, my radio crackling with search and rescue calls. The sun was setting, Somehow an entire day had passed. My pack contained only standard gear. My photos showed nothing but trees and trail markers. But Sierra Martinez was sitting beside me, alive and confused, wearing her North Face jacket and clutching her phone. "I found you," she said wonderingly. "I've been lost all day, and then I found you here, unconscious. Are you okay?" I sat up slowly, checking my hands. Human skin, human warmth, human sensation. "Yeah," I said. "I think we both are." We hiked out together as darkness fell. Sierra told me she'd gotten turned around after stopping to photograph something interesting. She couldn't remember what. Her phone showed no pictures from her hike, just empty storage where images should have been. I called her mother from the parking lot. Mrs. Martinez cried for 10 minutes straight when she heard Sierra's voice. The official report listed it as a successful rescue. Hiker disoriented by unfamiliar terrain, found by responding ranger. No injuries. Case closed. But sometimes late at night I dream about the circle. I see the dolls sitting in their eternal game, waiting for new players. And I wonder if I really broke the circle, or if I just postponed it. Because yesterday, on my morning patrol, I found a child's doll sitting at the base of a redwood. I left it there. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror. And comment your theory about what really happened to Sierra Martinez. I read every single one. The end author's note. This story explores the terror of the unexplained through the eyes of someone who relies on logic and analysis, showing how even the most rational mind can be shattered by forces beyond understanding. Tommy's journey from confident intellectual to supernatural survivor represents our own fear of the unknown and the limits of human comprehension. My name is Brandon Williams, and I should have forgotten Jessica Crawford's case, but something brought me back to that cursed forest. It was October 15th, 2018, and I'd been a ranger at Blackwater National Forest for 14 years. 14 years of successful rescues, of bringing lost hikers home to their families, of being the guy other rangers called when shit got real. They called me Bear because at 6'4" and 230 pounds of muscle earned from hauling people out of ravines, I was built like the grizzlies that roamed these mountains. But Jessica Crawford's case had haunted me for 6 months. 6 months since the 22-year-old photography student from Denver University had vanished without a trace on the Widow's Peak Trail. 6 months since her parents had begged me with tears streaming down their faces to find their baby girl. 6 months since I'd failed them. The case file sat on my kitchen table that morning, coffee rings staining the manila folder. Crime scene photos showed Jessica's abandoned camera gear scattered near mile marker 4.7, her expensive Canon 5D Mark IV lying face down in the pine needles, lens cracked like spider webbing. Her backpack hung from a low branch, contents spilled like guts from a gutted deer. But no Jessica. No blood. No drag marks. Nothing. My iPhone buzzed against the Formica surface. Text from my wife, Sarah. "You promised you'd let this go, Bear. Come home." I should have listened. Instead, I grabbed my gear bag and headed for my Forest Service truck. The October air bit at my face as I loaded my radio, GPS unit, first aid kit, and emergency supplies. My Motorola APX 6000 crackled to life as I checked in with dispatch. "Unit 47 to base, I'm 10-8 on a follow-up investigation." "Copy that, Bear. You're solo today." Thompson called in sick. Solo. Perfect. Because what I was about to do wasn't exactly authorized. The drive to Blackwater Forest took 45 minutes through winding mountain roads that climbed from 6,000 to 8,200 feet elevation. My truck's GPS showed coordinates 39.7391 degree N, 105.5103 degree W, as I pulled into the Widow's Peak trailhead parking lot. Empty except for a rusted-out Subaru with Colorado plates that looked like it had been there since the Clinton administration. I clipped my radio to my uniform shirt and started up the trail. My Danner boots found their familiar rhythm on the packed earth, 8-inch Acadias that had carried me through thousands of miles of Colorado wilderness. The weight of my patrol pack felt comfortable across my shoulders. 32 pounds of gear that could keep me alive for days if needed. But I wouldn't need days, because I'd walked this trail 100 times during the initial search. Every inch of the 2-mile loop had been grid searched by K9 units, analyzed by crime scene techs, combed by volunteers. We'd found nothing. The forest felt wrong today. It started as a subtle wrongness in my gut, the kind of intuition that had kept me alive during my army deployment in Afghanistan before I'd become a ranger. The morning birds that should have been singing their autumn songs were silent. The usual rustle of small mammals in the underbrush was absent. Even the wind seemed muted, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. At mile marker 2.1 I stopped. My altimeter read 7,450 feet. The trail curved left toward the creek bed where we'd found Jessica's water bottle 6 months ago. But something made me look right, into the dense stand of lodgepole pines that ranger maps showed as impenetrable deadfall. That's when I saw it. A path. Not a game trail. I knew every deer and elk route in this section. This was different. Narrow, maybe 2 feet wide, cutting straight through what should have been impassable timber. The pine needles looked recently disturbed, and the morning frost had melted in a perfect line marking the path's edges. My Garmin eTrex GPS unit showed no trail here, neither did my topographic maps. But my eyes don't lie. I keyed my radio. Unit 47 to base. Static. Unit 47 to base, radio check. More static, then a voice that sounded like it was coming from underwater. Copy. You're breaking up. The LCD display on my radio showed full signal strength, but the static grew worse, punctuated by what sounded almost like whispers in a language I couldn't understand. I switched the radio off and clipped it back to my belt. Whatever was happening, I was on my own. The new path called to me with an urgency I couldn't explain. Every instinct I'd developed in 14 years of wilderness work screamed that this was important. This was connected to Jessica. I stepped off the main trail. The moment my boot touched the narrow path, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. My breath came out in visible puffs despite the October morning being mild just seconds before. The silence became absolute, not just quiet, but a suffocating absence of sound that made my ears ring. 20 yards in, I found the first sign. Carved into the bark of a massive ponderosa pine was a symbol I'd never seen before, a twisted spiral surrounded by what looked like reaching hands. The carving was old, maybe decades, but the bark around it looked somehow infected. Black veins spread from the symbol like poisoned blood vessels, and the wood itself seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly light. My Nikon D750, I always carried a camera for evidence documentation, captured the symbol with its 24 to 120 millimeter lens. But when I checked the LCD display, the image showed only normal bark. No symbol, no black veins, nothing. The photo didn't match what my eyes were seeing. I shot another frame, then another. All showed normal tree bark, but the symbol remained visible to my naked eye, seeming to pulse brighter with each photograph I took. That's when I heard the whisper. Brandon? My name, spoken in a voice like autumn leaves scraping across concrete. A woman's voice, coming from deeper in the forest, coming from the direction the path led. Jessica? I called out, my voice cracking like I was 16 again. Silence, then. Help me, Brandon. I've been waiting. Every protocol I'd learned in ranger training told me to turn around, call for backup, wait for assistance. But Jessica Crawford's voice, and it was definitely her voice, I'd heard it on the voicemails her parents had played for me, pulled me forward like a fishhook in my chest. The path wound deeper into the pines, descending toward what my GPS showed as unmapped terrain. Impossible. I knew every square foot of this forest, but the elevation readings kept dropping. 7,200 feet, 7,000 feet, 6,800 feet. I should have been climbing toward Widow's Peak, not descending into some hidden valley that didn't exist on any map. At 6,500 feet elevation, the trees changed. The healthy lodgepole pines gave way to something else entirely. These trees were wrong, twisted, blackened, their branches reaching toward the ground instead of the sky. The bark looked diseased, covered in the same black veining I'd seen on the carved symbol. And the trunks. Christ, the trunks were too wide, too tall, growing in impossible spirals that hurt to look at directly. The path led straight through this diseased grove, and I had no choice but to follow. That's when the shadows started moving. Not the normal movement of shadows as clouds pass overhead or wind stirs branches. These shadows moved independently, flowing across the ground like black liquid, reaching toward my boots with what looked like grasping fingers. When one touched the leather of my danners, I felt it through the sole, cold, invasive, like ice water seeping into my bones. I jumped back, and the shadow retreated, but more were coming, flowing from the twisted trees, pooling in the spaces between the roots, and in the center of the largest shadow pool, something was emerging. A figure. Tall, impossibly thin, rising from the darkness like oil surfacing in water. At first it looked like a woman in a tattered black dress, but as it solidified I saw the truth. This thing had been a woman once, maybe centuries ago. Now it was something else. Its skin was the color of old parchment, stretched tight over bones that seemed too long for any human frame. Its hair hung in greasy black tendrils that moved without wind, and its eyes were holes in reality. Not black, absent. Looking into them was like staring into the space between stars, a void that pulled at my sanity and made my brain scream that such emptiness shouldn't exist. But it was the smile that nearly broke me. Too wide, full of teeth like broken glass, spreading across a face that had forgotten how to be human. "You came back, Brandon William," it said in a voice like grinding stone, "just as I knew you would. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Brandon's situation? Comment below. Chapter 2. The Bruxa Sombria. The thing that had once been human studied me with those impossible void eyes, and I felt my 14 years of ranger training crumble like old paper. Every search and rescue protocol, every wilderness survival technique, every ounce of hard-won experience meant nothing when faced with something that shouldn't exist. "What are you?" I managed to whisper, my hand instinctively reaching for the Glock 22 holstered at my hip. 15 rounds of .40 caliber hollow points, standard Forest Service issue for dealing with aggressive wildlife. The creature's glass-toothed smile widened. "I am what your people call the Bruxa Sombria, the Shadow Witch. I have walked in darkness since before your ancestors learned to make fire." She moved closer, and her shadow tendrils reached ahead of her, pooling around my boots. The cold seeped through my uniform pants, up my legs, into my core. I drew my weapon, the familiar weight of the Glock providing a moment of psychological comfort. "Where is Jessica Crawford?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. The witch tilted her head, the motion too fluid, like her neck contained no bones. "The pretty little photography student? She is safe. For now. Show me." "Oh, Brandon Williams. You think your little metal toy can harm me?" She gestured toward my pistol with one impossibly long finger. "I have been shot, stabbed, burned, drowned. Men have tried to kill me with everything from flintlock muskets to automatic weapons. Do you know what happens to their bullets?" Before I could answer, she raised her hand. The shadows around her feet surged upward, forming a writhing wall of liquid darkness between us. I fired 3 rounds center mass, the sharp crack of gunshots echoing through the diseased grove. The bullet struck the shadow wall and simply stopped. Suspended in the darkness like insects in amber, the hollow points hung motionless for a moment, before the shadows consumed them entirely. "They become part of me," the witch finished. "Just as Jessica will, unless what?" Her void eyes fixed on mine, and I felt something probing at the edges of my consciousness. Cold fingers of thought that weren't my own, rifling through my memories like pages in a book. "Unless you prove worthy of a trade?" The shadow wall dissolved, revealing the witch standing close enough that I could smell her. Earth and decay and something else. Something that reminded me of my grandmother's funeral. The scent of flowers left too long in a closed room. What kind of trade? Your life force, Brandon Williams. Your essence. Your soul, if you believe in such quaint concepts. She circled me slowly, her tattered dress trailing shadows that moved independent of any breeze. In exchange, I will release the girl. Bullshit. You'll kill us both. The witch stopped directly in front of me, so close that her breath, cold and tasting of copper pennies, fogged against my face. Perhaps. Or perhaps I will honor our bargain. You will never know unless you accept. Show me Jessica first, prove she's alive. Something like amusement flickered across the witch's ancient features. Very well. She raised both hands, fingers spread wide, and the shadows around us began to swirl. The diseased grove faded, replaced by what looked like a massive underground cavern. The walls were rough stone, carved with more of those twisted spiral symbols, and the air tasted of sulfur and old blood. In the center of the cavern, suspended 3 feet off the ground by writhing shadow tendrils, was Jessica Crawford. She was alive, but barely. The 22-year-old who'd gone missing 6 months ago now looked decades older. Her brown hair had gone completely white, and her skin was pale as paper. The shadows held her in a sitting position, arms spread wide, head hanging forward. But she was breathing. I could see her chest rise and fall in shallow, rapid movements. "Jessica!" I shouted. Her head lifted slowly, and when her eyes met mine, I saw intelligence there. Recognition. Hope. Bear? Her voice was barely a whisper, raw and broken. You came back for me. I never stopped looking, kid. The lie came easily. I had stopped. We all had, after the FBI closed the case and declared her dead in absentia. I'm getting you out of here. The witch's laughter was like breaking glass. Oh, how touching. The veteran ranger, so confident, so experienced. Tell me, Brandon Williams, how many people have you saved in your career? I don't keep count. 47, she said, reading my thoughts again. 47 successful rescues, lost hikers, injured climbers, children who wandered from campsites. You have built your entire identity around saving people, haven't you? I didn't answer, but she was right. Every commendation in my file, every newspaper article about my rescues, every proud look from my wife and daughters when I came home with another success story, it all defined who I was. And only one failure, the witch continued. Jessica Crawford, the case that haunts your dreams, the family whose tears you still taste when you close your eyes. Shut up. The reason you're here, alone, against protocol, despite promising your wife you'd let it go. Her void eyes seemed to consume the cavern's dim light. You cannot bear the thought of failure, can you? It eats at you like cancer. She was in my head now, pulling up memories I'd tried to bury. Jessica's mother collapsing in my arms when we called off the official search. Her father's hand on my shoulder, telling me it wasn't my fault while his eyes said otherwise. The sleepless nights, the whiskey that didn't help, the growing distance between Sarah and me as the case consumed my thoughts. I can end that pain, the witch whispered. Give me what I want, and Jessica goes free. You fail one final time, but she lives. Her parents get their daughter back. Your 47 successes will be remembered, not your one failure. And if I refuse? The witch gestured toward Jessica. The shadow tendrils holding her began to tighten, and the girl screamed, a sound of pure agony that echoed off the cavern walls. Stop! I raised my Glock again, knowing it was useless but unable to stand Jessica's pain. The shadows loosened, and Jessica's screams faded to gasping sobs. Choose quickly, Brandon Williams. My patience is not infinite. I looked at Jessica, suspended in that nightmare web of shadow and malice, and felt something crack inside my chest. Not my ribs, something deeper. The part of me that had always believed I could save everyone, that had built my entire life around being the hero of other people's stories. But as I stood there, gun trained on an enemy I couldn't kill, looking at a victim I couldn't reach, I realized something the witch hadn't counted on. I wasn't just Brandon Bear Williams, veteran forest ranger. I was also a husband, a father, A man who'd made promises to people who loved him. And for the first time in 6 months, I thought about going home. Chapter 3. The Power of Love. I need time to think, I said, lowering my weapon but not holstering it. The witch's expression shifted to something that might have been surprise. Time? You wish to delay? 10 minutes. Give me 10 minutes to decide. You try my patience, Ranger. 10 minutes, or I walk away right now and you lose your chance at my essence forever. It was a bluff, and we both knew it. I couldn't walk away from Jessica any more than I could stop breathing, but the witch didn't know about the text message in my pocket, the one from Sarah that had started this whole nightmare day. You promised you'd let this go, Bear. Come home. Home. To my wife of 16 years, who'd stood by me through PTSD from Afghanistan, through the career change to Forest Service, through every late night and dangerous rescue. Sarah Williams, who still made my coffee exactly the way I liked it and left little notes in my lunch bag. Home. To my 10-year-old daughter, Emma, who thought her daddy was a superhero because he saved people in the mountains, who drew pictures of me in my ranger uniform and hung them on her bedroom wall. Home. To my 8-year-old daughter, Chloe, who always waited by the front window when I was late getting back from calls, her nose pressed against the glass, until she saw my truck pull into the driveway. The witch was studying me with those void eyes, trying to read my thoughts. But I'd learned something during my deployment that she couldn't understand. Love, real love, the kind that builds families and keeps marriages strong through decades of hardship, creates a kind of mental armor that darkness can't penetrate. I pulled out my iPhone and looked at Sarah's text message. Below it was a photo she'd sent that morning. Emma and Chloe at the breakfast table, still in their pajamas, sharing a bowl of cereal and giggling about something only sisters understand. Your family, the witch said, her voice taking on a hungry edge. Yes, I can see them in your thoughts. Such pretty little girls. Such a devoted wife. Stay out of my head. Oh, but they're so vivid in your memories. Emma's laugh when you push her on the swing set. Chloe's bedtime stories about the brave ranger daddy. Sarah's body warm against yours on cold mountain mornings. The shadows around us began to shift and swirl, and suddenly I was looking at my living room. Sarah sat on our leather couch, Emma and Chloe curled up on either side of her. They were watching a movie, something animated with bright colors, but Sarah kept checking her phone, waiting for me to call. Worried because I'd left that morning with the Jessica Crawford file and the look she'd learned to fear over the years. They have no idea where you are, the witch continued. No idea you're facing a choice between their future and a stranger's life. Jessica isn't a stranger. She's someone's daughter. And your girls are your daughters. Which matters more, Brandon Williams? Your pride or their father coming home alive? The vision shifted. Now I saw Sarah getting a phone call in the middle of the night. A state trooper at our front door with his hat in his hands, and that particular expression cops wear when they're about to destroy a family. Emma and Chloe waking up to their mother's screams, running downstairs to find her collapsed on the hardwood floor. This is what happens if you choose Jessica, the witch whispered. Your body will never be found. Your family will spend the rest of their lives wondering what happened to you. Emma will grow up believing her father abandoned her. Chloe will develop trust issues that destroy every relationship she ever tries to build. And Sarah, the vision focused on my wife, older now, sitting alone at our kitchen table on what would have been our 20th anniversary. No ring on her finger, no light in her eyes, the vibrant woman I'd married replaced by a hollow shell who'd never recovered from my disappearance. Sarah will blame herself for not stopping you. She'll drink herself to sleep every night and wake up every morning hoping this is the day she won't miss you anymore. But that day will never come. I felt tears on my cheeks. When had I started crying? The witch's visions were like knives, cutting deep into every fear I'd ever had about my dangerous job. Every time Sarah had begged me to transfer to a desk position, every promise I'd made to be careful, to come home safe, to never leave them alone. But if you walk away, the vision changed again. Now I saw myself pulling into our driveway at dinner time. Emma and Chloe running out to meet me, wrapping their arms around my legs while Sarah smiled from the front porch. Family dinner around our oak table, homework help and bedtime stories. Growing old with the woman I loved, watching our daughters graduate and marry and have children of their own. All you have to do is turn around and leave. Jessica Crawford means nothing to you. She's been gone 6 months. Her parents have already grieved, already moved on. Her loss won't destroy a family the way yours would. I looked at Jessica, still suspended in her shadow prison, and saw understanding in her eyes. She knew what the witch was offering me. She knew what choice I was facing, and she nodded. "Go home, Bear," Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible over the witch's laughter. "Go home to your family. I understand." But as I stood there, torn between saving a stranger and protecting my own daughters, I remembered something my father had told me when I was 10 years old and Emma's age. We'd been fishing at Cherry Creek Reservoir, and I'd hooked a rainbow trout, the biggest fish I'd ever caught. But as I was reeling it in, I saw a smaller fish in the shallows, obviously injured, struggling to swim. "Daddy, can we help the hurt fish?" I'd asked. He'd looked at me with the same serious expression he wore when he was teaching me important life lessons. "Son, there's something you need to understand about being a man. Sometimes you'll face choices where there's no perfect answer, where saving one person might cost another. But if you start deciding who's worth saving and who isn't, if you start putting conditions on your compassion, you'll lose something inside yourself that you can never get back." I'd released my rainbow trout and spent the next hour trying to help the injured fish, even though my dad had to explain that sometimes helping means letting go. "Your father was a fool," the witch said, reading my memory. "And his philosophy got him killed in that car accident, didn't it? Stopped to help a stranger with a flat tire on I-25, got rear-ended by a drunk driver." She was right. Dad had died helping someone he didn't know, someone who walked away from the accident without a scratch while paramedics pulled my father's broken body from the wreckage. But as I thought about that night, the worst night of my life until today, I realized something. Dad had died doing what he believed was right. And in the 16 years since, I'd built my entire career around the same principle. Saving people not because they deserved it or because it was safe or because it wouldn't cost me anything, but because it was right. I looked at Jessica again and saw my father's eyes looking back at me. The same quiet courage, the same acceptance of whatever choice I made, the same understanding that some things matter more than survival. And suddenly I knew what I had to do. I pulled out my iPhone and speed dialed Sarah's number. It rang once, twice. "Bear? Honey, are you okay? You sound..." "Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Don't interrupt. Don't ask questions. Just listen. You're scaring me. I love you. I love you more than my own life, more than breathing, more than anything else in this world. You and Emma and Chloe are everything to me. Brandon, Tell the girls their daddy loves them. Tell them I'm proud of them every single day. Tell them that sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices, but that doesn't mean we stop loving our families." "Oh God. Bear, where are you? What's happening?" "And Sarah, if something happens to me, if I don't come home tonight, I need you to know it's not your fault. I need you to remarry someday, find someone who'll love you and the girls the way you deserve. Don't spend your life waiting for me. Brandon Williams, you listen to me right now." I hung up and turned off the phone. The witch was staring at me with something that might have been respect. "You surprise me, Ranger. I expected you to choose your family." "I did choose my family," I said, holstering my Glock and taking a step toward Jessica. "I chose to make sure my daughters grow up knowing their father died trying to save someone. Not that he abandoned someone to save himself. You will die for nothing. She will die anyway. Maybe. But I'll die knowing I tried." The witch's laughter had an edge of uncertainty now. "You think your noble sacrifice will somehow defeat me? I have existed for centuries. I have consumed the souls of warriors, priests, heroes. What makes you think—" "Because you're wrong about one thing," I interrupted. walking steadily toward Jessica despite the shadows reaching for my legs. You said I've built my identity around saving people. But that's not true. The shadow tendrils wrapped around my ankles, my calves climbing higher with each step. The cold was excruciating, like liquid nitrogen in my veins. But I kept walking. I built my identity around loving people, I continued. My wife, my daughters, the strangers I rescue, even you, you miserable creature. Because that's what my father taught me, and that's what I'm teaching my girls. The shadows reached my waist, my chest. My uniform was freezing to my skin, and I could feel ice crystals forming in my lungs with each breath. But I was only 10 feet from Jessica now, close enough to see the hope growing in her eyes. Love isn't just an emotion, I gasped through the supernatural cold. It's a force. It's what creates families and builds communities and makes people risk their lives for strangers. And you've been alone so long, you've forgotten what it feels like. The witch's void eyes flickered. For just a moment I saw something human in them. Something lost and desperate and infinitely sad. You've forgotten, I repeated, reaching out toward Jessica despite the shadows trying to drag me down. But I haven't, and neither has she. My fingers touched Jessica's hand. The moment we made contact, something extraordinary happened. The cold that had been killing me suddenly blazed into warmth. Not the heat of fire, but the warmth of my wife's embrace, of my daughter's laughter, of every moment of love I'd ever experienced or witnessed or dreamed of. The shadows recoiled as if burned. The witch screamed, a sound like every nightmare I'd ever had distilled into pure audio terror. But underneath the scream, I heard something else. I heard crying, not the screams of rage or pain, but the desperate sobbing of someone who'd been alone for so long they'd forgotten their own name. The cavern began to collapse around us, shadows and stone dissolving into something else entirely. And as Jessica fell into my arms, as the witch's centuries-old prison crumbled, I saw the truth. The Bruxa Sombria hadn't been the witch. She'd been the witch's first victim. Chapter 4, The Truth in Shadows. As the cavern dissolved around us, I found myself holding Jessica Crawford on solid ground, real ground, covered in autumn pine needles and morning frost. We were back in Blackwater National Forest, back in the real world, but somehow everything had changed. The diseased trees were gone, replaced by healthy lodge poles that rustled in a normal October breeze. The twisted path that had led me here was nowhere to be seen, just the familiar Widow's Peak trail stretching toward the parking lot a mile and a half away. But the woman who'd called herself the Bruxa Sombria was still there. Only now she looked different. The void eyes were gone, replaced by ordinary brown ones filled with tears. The impossible thinness had been replaced by a normal human frame, and instead of the tattered black dress, she wore hiking clothes from what looked like the 1950s. Wool pants, a flannel shirt, leather boots that had seen better decades. She was crying, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body as she knelt in the pine needles 20 feet away. Jessica stirred in my arms, her white hair slowly returning to its natural brown as I watched. The supernatural aging was reversing itself, color returning to her cheeks like time running backward. "Bear," she whispered. "What happened? Where am I?" "You're safe, kid. You're safe." I helped her sit up, then grabbed my radio. This time it worked perfectly. No static, no whispers. "Unit 47 to base. I need immediate medical assistance at coordinates 39.7391 north, 105.5103 west. I've got Jessica Crawford, and she's alive." The response was instant. "Unit 47, did you say Jessica Crawford? Confirm you have the missing person from the cold case?" "Confirmed. She's conscious and responsive, but she needs medical evaluation. I also need additional units for a related situation." While I waited for backup, I approached the crying woman carefully. She looked up at my approach, and I saw she was younger than I'd thought. Maybe 30, with the kind of face that belonged in an old photograph. Pretty in a timeless way that transcended fashion or era. "Please," she whispered. "Please don't hurt me. I didn't want to. What's your name? I asked gently, using the same tone I'd learned to employ with trauma victims. Margaret Sullivan. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I've been lost for so long. I don't remember how long. I pulled out my iPhone and did a quick search for Margaret Sullivan missing Colorado. The results made my blood run cold. Margaret Sullivan, age 29, reported missing in Blackwater National Forest on October 13, 1952. Photography enthusiast from Denver. Never found. 66 years. Margaret, I said carefully, what's the last thing you remember before you got lost? I was taking pictures of the autumn colors. For the Denver Post, they were going to publish them in the Sunday edition. Her voice had the cadence of someone from another era, formal and precise. I saw something beautiful deeper in the forest, followed a path that seemed to appear just for me. And then she shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. I found a clearing with a stone circle, ancient, like something from a museum. There were symbols carved into the rocks, and in the center was this thing, not human, not animal, something that had been trapped there for God knows how long. The pieces clicked into place. The real Bruxa Sombria hadn't been Margaret. Margaret had been its first victim when she'd accidentally discovered its prison. And for 66 years, the entity had been using her as a host, feeding off her life force while slowly driving her insane with its presence. It spoke to me, Margaret continued, promised me fame, success, everything I'd ever wanted if I just let it inside for a moment, to share my body, my mind. I was young and ambitious and stupid, and I said yes. And then it trapped you. Not trapped, consumed. It took everything, my memories, my personality, my soul, and left just enough of me conscious to suffer. For 66 years, I've been a passenger in my own body, watching that thing use me to hunt others. Jessica had recovered enough to walk over and join our conversation. The color was completely back in her cheeks now, though her eyes held the hollow look of someone who'd seen too much. It made me watch, Jessica said quietly, while it used Margaret to hunt other people. Hikers, campers, people like me who got too close to its territory. I wasn't the first. How many? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Dozens, Margaret whispered. Over the decades, it would take them to that place between worlds, feed on their fear and pain for months before. She couldn't finish. But something was different this time, Jessica continued. With me, I kept talking about my family, about people who loved me and were looking for me. And I think Margaret started remembering what love felt like. I looked at Margaret, who was nodding through her tears. Your love for your family, she said to me, and hers for her parents. It reminded me of what I'd lost, what the entity had stolen from me, and for the first time in 66 years I fought back. That's why the shadows pulled back when I touched Jessica. It wasn't my love that burned the entity, it was yours. You chose to remember what it meant to be human. The sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the forest. Backup was arriving. Paramedics, other rangers, probably FBI agents who'd want to know how a cold case had suddenly solved itself. I'd have to come up with explanations that didn't involve supernatural entities and shadow magic. But first, there was something else I needed to do. I pulled out my iPhone and called Sarah. She answered on the first ring. Brandon Williams, if you ever scare me like that again. I'm okay, baby, I'm coming home. Did you find her? I looked at Jessica, who was helping Margaret to her feet with gentle hands and the kind of compassion that came from shared trauma. Yeah, I said. I found her, both of them. Both? Long story. I'll tell you everything when I get home, but Sarah, hug Emma and Chloe for me. Tell them their daddy's okay and he'll be home for dinner. I love you, Bear. I love you too, more than you'll ever know. As I hung up, Margaret approached me with something like wonder in her brown eyes. That's what it feels like, she said softly. I'd forgotten. That's what love feels like. The first Forest Service truck crested the ridge, followed by an ambulance and what looked like half the law enforcement in Colorado. Within minutes, the quiet forest would be transformed into a crime scene, full of officials asking questions and demanding explanations I couldn't possibly give. But for just a moment longer, it was peaceful. Just 3 people who'd survived something impossible, standing in a forest that had returned to normal, breathing air that tasted of pine needles and possibility instead of shadows and despair. Jessica slipped her arm through Margaret's, supporting the older woman who was still weak from her ordeal. We're going to be okay, she said, and I could tell she was talking to both of us. We all made it out. As the rescue vehicles pulled into the clearing, I realized she was right. We had all made it out, not just alive, but human, still capable of love, still capable of choosing compassion over survival, still capable of saving each other. It was enough. Epilogue, 6 months later. April 15th, 2019. My name is Brandon Williams, and today I'm retiring from the Forest Service. 16 years of rescues, of bringing people home safe, of being the ranger other rangers called when situations got desperate. 48 successful cases if you count Jessica Crawford and Margaret Sullivan as one mission. Not a bad record for a guy who'd started out just wanting to help people in the wilderness. The retirement party was everything Sarah and the girls had hoped for. Half of Colorado law enforcement showed up, along with dozens of people I'd pulled out of ravines and snowstorms over the years. Stories were told, beers were consumed, and more than a few tears were shed when Chief Ranger Harrison read the commendations from my file. But the best part was seeing Jessica and Margaret together at one of the picnic tables. Jessica had returned to college after 3 months of therapy, but she'd changed majors from photography to social work. I want to help people who've been through trauma, she told me during one of our monthly check-ins, people who've been lost and need someone to help them find their way home. Margaret had been the bigger challenge. Try explaining to federal investigators how a woman who'd been missing for 66 years had suddenly reappeared, looking exactly the same age as when she'd vanished. Try explaining it without mentioning supernatural entities or shadow magic, or the space between worlds where time moves differently. The official report listed her as a victim of human trafficking who'd been held in an isolated compound and recently escaped. It wasn't true, but it was the kind of truth that let everyone sleep at night. Margaret had been given a new identity, a social security number, and a small apartment in Denver where she was slowly learning to live in the 21st century. She's remarkable, Jessica said as I joined them at their table. You should see her with the therapy group. She has this way of talking to trauma victims, of understanding what they've been through. Margaret smiled, a real smile that lit up her entire face. I had a good teacher, she said, squeezing Jessica's hand. Someone who showed me that even in the darkest places, love can still shine through. I'd heard they were planning to move in together, 2 women bonded by an experience no one else could understand. Jessica's parents had initially been skeptical of their daughter's new roommate, but Margaret's old-fashioned manners and obvious devotion to Jessica had won them over quickly. What about you, Bear? Jessica asked. What's next for the famous forest ranger? I looked across the party to where Sarah was laughing with some of the other wives, Emma and Chloe playing tag between the picnic tables with the kids of my fellow rangers, my family, whole and happy and completely unaware of how close I'd come to never seeing them again. Private consulting, I said. Search and rescue training for civilian groups, maybe some writing. I've been thinking about putting together a wilderness survival guide. It was true, but not the whole truth. What I didn't mention was the other calls I'd been getting, from police departments in other states, from FBI agents working cold cases that defied explanation, from people who'd heard whispered stories about the ranger who'd solved the impossible Jessica Crawford case, cases involving things that couldn't be explained by conventional investigation, things that required someone who understood that the world was bigger and stranger and more dangerous than most people could imagine, someone who'd learned that love wasn't just an emotion, but a force powerful enough to break supernatural curses and free imprisoned souls. Someone who'd discovered that the most important rescues weren't always about bringing people back from the wilderness, but about bringing them back to their own humanity. My radio crackled. I'd kept the frequency open for old time's sake. Unit 47, we've got a situation. Unit 47 is 10-7, I replied automatically. End of watch. But even as I said it, I was already thinking about the calls that would come tomorrow. The cases that couldn't be solved with conventional methods. The people who needed someone willing to walk into the dark places where ordinary heroes feared to tread. I looked at Margaret and Jessica, at my wife and daughters, at the collection of law enforcement officers who'd become my extended family over the years. Some stories end with retirement and picnics, and happily ever after. Others end with the understanding that the real work is just beginning. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying Ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror and comment your theory about what really happened to Jessica Crawford. I read every single one. Want more spine-chilling forest ranger encounters? Let me know what supernatural entity should terrorize our heroes next. Drop your scariest ideas below. My name is Tyler Rodriguez, and at 6:47 a.m. my radio crackled with the call that would change my life forever. Unit 23, we have a code yellow missing person at Pine Ridge, 22-year-old female Sarah Williams, last seen yesterday evening at Deadfall Creek Campground. Families requesting immediate search and rescue. Over. I was 3 sips into my morning coffee when dispatch crackled through, the bitter taste turning metallic in my mouth as that familiar chill ran down my spine. Not the normal pre-search nerves, something else. Something wrong. My gut twisted with an intuition I'd learned to trust over 8 years of ranger work, a sixth sense that had saved my ass more times than I could count. Copy that, dispatch. Unit 23 responding. ETA 20 minutes to Deadfall Creek. Over. I grabbed my Garmin eTrex GPS, checking the coordinates. 40.891 degree N, 111.4982 degree DW. The northwest sector of Pine Ridge, where the old-growth pines grew so thick, they blocked out the sky even at noon. My wife Maria was still sleeping when I kissed her forehead. Her dark hair spread across the pillow like silk. Our daughter Isabella's drawing from yesterday, a stick figure family with "I love you, Daddy" in crayon, was tucked in my shirt pocket next to my heart. Just like every shift, my ritual. The drive to Pine Ridge took 18 minutes. My Ford F-150 climbing the winding mountain roads as the September morning mist clung to the valley below. 2018 had been a weird year for disappearances in Colorado's national forests. 7 missing persons cases across 3 parks, all young adults, all with families desperate enough to call in favors and pressure local authorities. The kind of pressure that made my supervisor assign me personally to every case. At Deadfall Creek, Sarah Williams' parents waited by their Honda Pilot. The mother's mascara streaked down her cheeks in black rivers. The father, a big guy in a Denver Broncos jacket, grabbed my forearm with trembling hands. "Ranger Rodriguez?" Thank God. Sarah never came back to the tent last night. She went to collect firewood around 7 p.m. and his voice cracked. She wouldn't just leave. She's getting married next month. She's got everything to live for. That wrongness in my gut twisted tighter. The air around the campground felt thick, oppressive, like the moment before lightning strikes. My skin prickled with invisible electricity, and the forest, usually alive with morning bird calls, was dead silent. "I need you to show me exactly where she was headed," I said, pulling out my incident report tablet. "Any specific trail? Any landmarks she mentioned?" The mother, barely holding it together, pointed toward a narrow deer path leading into the tree line. "She said she saw a lot of good deadfall that way yesterday. Dry branches for the fire. She's always been so responsible, never takes risks." I nodded, making notes, but my attention was pulled to the forest edge. Something was watching us. I could feel eyes boring into my back, raising every hair on my neck. When I turned, scanning the shadows between the massive pine trunks, I caught the briefest glimpse of movement. Small. Child-sized. "How long since you called this in?" I asked, not taking my eyes off the forest. "This morning at 6. We waited all night." thinking maybe she got turned around, maybe she was sheltering somewhere safe. The father's voice carried the weight of parental terror. But when the sun came up and she still wasn't back, I checked my watch. 7:23 a.m. Sarah Williams had been missing roughly 12 hours. In wilderness search and rescue, the first 24 hours were critical. After that, survival rates dropped exponentially. And with my intuition screaming danger, I wasn't optimistic about finding her unharmed. I'm going to start tracking her route, I told them, shouldering my SAR pack, 43 pounds of rescue gear, medical supplies, and emergency equipment. Stay here at base camp. If she comes back, radio me immediately on channel 16. I activated my GPS beacon and started into the forest, following the deer path Sarah had taken. The morning sun filtered through the canopy in golden shafts, but shadows pooled between the trees like spilled ink. My boots, Danner Mountain 600s with Vibram soles, crunched on pine needles and decomposing leaves, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. 50 yards in, I found her first sign. A partial boot print in soft earth near a fallen log. Size 8 hiking boot, probably Merrill or Keen brand based on the tread pattern. The print pointed deeper into the forest, away from any established trails. That's when I heard it. Crying. A child's voice, thin and desperate, echoing from somewhere deeper in the trees. My blood turned to ice water. There weren't supposed to be any other campers in this section of the park. "Hello?" I called out, my voice carrying through the still air. "Are you hurt? I'm a park ranger." The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so complete it made my ears ring. I waited, counting heartbeats, sweat beading on my forehead despite the cool morning air. Then, faintly, I heard it again, but from a different direction. Southeast, maybe 200 yards away. My radio crackled. "Unit 23, this is base. Any sign of the missing person? Over." "Negative on Sarah Williams, but I'm hearing what sounds like a child in distress. Investigating, over." I clipped the radio back to my belt and continued deeper into the forest, following the sound. The trees grew denser, older, their trunks like cathedral pillars supporting a ceiling of interwoven branches that blocked most of the sky. The temperature dropped noticeably, and my breath began to mist. Wrong. Everything about this felt wrong. Pine Ridge in September should be crisp, but not cold, and the absolute silence of wildlife set every nerve on edge. I found the second boot print near a cluster of granite boulders, but this one was different. Smaller, much smaller. A child's bare footprint pressed into a patch of damp earth, the toes clearly defined, but the shape was wrong somehow. Too long, too narrow, like fingers instead of toes. The crying started again, closer now. Maybe 50 yards ahead, coming from a dense thicket of young pines and underbrush. I could hear words mixed with the sobs. "Help me, please. I'm scared." Every instinct I developed as a ranger was screaming at me to turn around, to get back to base camp, to call for backup. But Sarah Williams was still missing, and if there was a lost child out here too. I pushed through the thicket, branches catching on my uniform and scratching exposed skin. The crying led me to a small clearing, where the trees formed a perfect circle, their trunks twisted and gnarled in ways that defied nature. In the center of the clearing, sitting on a moss-covered stump, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, with long blonde hair and a white dress that should have been filthy after a night in the forest, but somehow remained pristine. She was facing away from me, her small shoulders shaking with sobs. "Hey there, sweetheart," I said softly, not wanting to startle her. "I'm Tyler, a park ranger. Are you lost? Where are your parents?" The little girl's crying stopped, but she didn't turn around. When she spoke, her voice was sweet and innocent, but something about it made my skin crawl. "I can't find my mommy," she said. "She went away and left me here all alone. I've been waiting so long." I approached slowly, my hand hovering near the radio. "What's your name, honey? How long have you been out here?" "I'm Emma," she said, still not turning. I think my mommy might be lost too." like the pretty lady with the dark hair who came looking for sticks yesterday. My heart stopped. Sarah Williams had dark hair. The pretty lady. Did you see where she went? Emma finally turned around and I had to bite back a scream. Her face was that of a child, but her eyes, Jesus Christ, her eyes were ancient, black as coal and filled with an intelligence that no 7-year-old should possess. When she smiled, her teeth were filed to points. She went to play with my friends, Emma said sweetly. Would you like to play too, Mr. Ranger? I stumbled backward, my hand going for my radio, but the device was dead. Completely black screen, no response. My phone showed no signal, and worse, the time display was flickering between 7:47 a.m. and 3:33 a.m. in rapid succession. They're waiting for you, Emma continued, rising from the stump with movements that were too fluid, too graceful for a human child. The other children, we've been waiting for so long to have new friends to play with. That's when I saw them. They emerged from behind the trees one by one, children of various ages, maybe a dozen in total, all wearing clothes from different decades. A boy in 1970s bell-bottoms, a girl in a 1950s dress, another boy in what looked like turn-of-the-century knickers. All of them had the same filed teeth, the same ancient eyes, and all of them were holding pieces of Sarah Williams. The boy in bell-bottoms clutched her left hand, still wearing her engagement ring. The girl in the 50s dress held a section of her forearm, blood dripping from where it had been severed. Another child, this one couldn't have been more than 5, was gnawing on what looked like Sarah's scalp, dark hair matted with gore. I vomited immediately, my morning coffee and yesterday's dinner spattering across the forest floor as my mind tried to process what I was seeing. The children giggled at my reaction, a sound like wind chimes made of bone. She was delicious, Emma said, skipping closer. But she screamed too much at first. We had to quiet her down before we could start the feast. Daddy says fresh meat makes us strong for the gathering. Daddy? I managed to gasp between heaves. Daddy Sebastian, Emma replied proudly. He teaches us the old ways, the ways of blood and sacrifice. He says when we bring him enough offerings, he'll take us home to the eternal darkness. My training kicked in despite the horror. These weren't children. They were something else wearing children's faces. Predators. Killers. And Sarah Williams was already dead, torn apart and consumed by these things. I reached for my sidearm, a Glock 19 I'd carried for 8 years without ever firing in the line of duty. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip it. Oh, you want to play guns? Emma clapped her hands together, still smiling that horrible pointed smile. We love that game, but our rules are different. The child with Sarah's scalp dropped his grisly prize and charged at me on all fours, moving with inhuman speed across the forest floor. I pulled the trigger 3 times, center mass shots that should have dropped anything living. The bullets punched through the thing that looked like a 5-year-old boy, exit wounds spraying black ichor instead of blood. But it didn't even slow down. Tiny hands grabbed my ankle with the strength of a grown man, fingers digging through my boot leather and into skin. I felt bones crack as it dragged me down, my head striking the ground hard enough to make stars explode across my vision. The other children advanced in a circle, moving with that same unnatural grace. Emma produced a rusty knife from behind her back, a blade stained with what could only be Sarah's blood. Don't worry, Mr. Ranger, she said sweetly. We'll save the best parts for Daddy. He especially loves the liver. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Tyler Rodriguez's situation? Comment below. That's when the rage hit me, not fear, pure white-hot fury. These things had murdered Sarah Williams, torn her apart like animals while she was probably still alive, still hoping someone would come save her. A young woman about to be married with parents who loved her, with a whole life ahead of her, and they wanted to do the same to me, to leave Maria a widow, to make Isabella grow up without her father. Fuck that. Something inside me snapped. And for the first time in my life, my intuitive abilities exploded beyond simple hunches and feelings. I could sense their unnatural presence like radioactive heat signatures, could feel the malevolent energy that animated their stolen child forms. More than that, I could feel their weakness. They were bound to this place, this clearing, trapped here by whatever ritual had created them. And the thing they called Daddy Sebastian? He wasn't here, he was elsewhere, controlling them from a distance. I rolled away from the creature gnawing on my ankle, grabbed a fallen branch thick as a baseball bat, and swung with everything I had. The impact shattered the thing's skull like rotten fruit, black gore exploding across my uniform. It dropped immediately, whatever force animating it suddenly cut off. "He found our weakness," Emma shrieked, her sweet child's voice becoming something inhuman. "Stop him, stop him." But I was already moving, that supernatural sense guiding me toward something I could feel but not see, a presence in the trees above the clearing. I looked up and saw it, a massive sigil carved into the bark of the largest pine, still bleeding sap from fresh cuts, the focal point of whatever kept these things tethered to our world. I emptied my remaining rounds into the tree trunk, bark exploding in chunks around the carved symbol. The children screamed in unison, their forms beginning to flicker and distort like bad television reception. Emma made one last desperate lunge at me, that rusty knife aimed at my throat. But I could see her movement before she made it, could sense the trajectory of her attack. I grabbed her wrist and twisted until bones snapped with wet pops. The knife clattered to the ground. "Tell your daddy Sebastian," I snarled, my voice barely recognizable as my own, "that if he wants more offerings, he can come collect them himself." I grabbed a handful of pine pitch from the wounded tree and smeared it across the carved sigil, feeling power drain out of the symbol like air from a punctured tire. The children's screams reached a crescendo that shattered birds from trees half a mile away. Then silence. They were gone. All of them. The only evidence they'd ever existed was Sarah Williams' remains scattered across the clearing like discarded butcher shop scraps. I spent the next hour collecting what I could of her, fighting back waves of nausea as I bagged pieces of a young woman who died in unimaginable terror. Her engagement ring was still warm when I peeled it from her severed finger. The walk back to base camp took forever. My radio had mysteriously started working again, but I couldn't bring myself to call it in yet. How do you explain something like this? How do you tell parents that their daughter was consumed by things that shouldn't exist? When I finally emerged from the tree line, Sarah's parents took one look at my blood-soaked uniform and knew. Her mother collapsed against the Honda Pilot, keening like a wounded animal. Her father just stared at me with hollow eyes. Did she suffer?" he asked finally. I lied through my teeth. It was quick. She wouldn't have felt anything. But that night, alone in my shower, washing Sarah Williams' blood from under my fingernails, I made a promise. If there were more things like those children out there, more servants of Daddy Sebastian, I would find them. And I would send every last one back to whatever hell had spawned them. Because some monsters wear innocent faces, and some rangers are more than they appear to be. 6 months later, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, a man in a black robe standing in front of what looked like an altar made of human bones. On the back, someone had written, "Daddy Sebastian sends his regards," in what looked suspiciously like dried blood. The hunt continues. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror and comment your theory about what really happened to Sarah Williams. I read every single one.